Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about the impacts of climatic events and anomalies in temperatures on intimate partner violence in sub-Saharan Africa. This is joint work with Jonas Peisker, Erich Striesnik, Raya Mutarak, and two colleagues from UNFPA, Angela Batskeri and Chagosi Ude. And this work was also funded by the UNFPA. Globally, intimate partner violence is a major issue. The WHO estimates that for 2018, 245 million women have experienced intimate partner violence only in the last year. In Africa, we see particularly high numbers, prevalence rates in the global comparison. Here in a lifetime, 37% of women reported to have been affected by violence within intimate relationships. And here you see the map with a distribution of, the spatial distribution of intimate partner violence across the region. With climate change, the situation may even worsen more. Climate change can put additional pressure on relationships through impacts, negative impacts on human lives, ecosystems, and livelihoods. There is a number of studies that have looked and have identified already impacts on mental health, aggressive behaviors, issues related to food and water stress, and generally feelings of insecurity. Also, other studies have looked into early marriage and kind of partnership formation that could all lead to an increase in violence in partnerships. Here in this study, we're interested in the impact of temperature anomalies on IPV in sub-Saharan Africa, using also DHS data, like Ndale has just presented it, and using a similar identification approach as the one that Jacopo has presented before, so I'm benefiting of the two previous presentations here. What we do is we combine information on the locations of the households in sub-Saharan Africa with information about previous anomalies in temperatures encountered in these areas in the 12 months prior to the DHS data collection. And then we explore differential demographic vulnerabilities to climatic stress for different subgroups in the population to see who is mostly affected by the anomalies. And then we use these insights to project future levels of IPV, considering different shared socioeconomic pathways and representative concentration pathways. We find that temperature anomalies indeed have a positive influence on the risk of a woman being exposed to any physical violence. So we estimate that a 1 standard deviation temperature anomalies leads to an increase in the probability of being affected for a woman by 2.79%. When we look at different forms of violence, we see that this effect is mainly driven by increases in less severe violence, more than severe and sexual violence, where we also see significant effects. When we look beyond physical violence, we also interestingly find a pretty strong effect on emotional violence due to these climatic events. We then distinguish the effects by different population groups where we see major heterogeneity. We find that it's mostly younger women that are affected by the anomalies, as well as low-educated women. So we do not see any significant effects on the higher educated women, but the effects are really concentrated among those with a lower education. So it seems that education really serves as a factor that can help mitigating some of the risks and increase the resilience of women in this context. We also find spatial differences, so we look at basically the effect differences across different macro regions in sub-Saharan Africa, where we then find that the effects are mainly concentrated in Southern Africa as well as Central Africa. We use these insights for our projections, so here we rely on shared socioeconomic pathways which describe different development pathways, as well as a combination of representative concentration pathways that describe potential future climate change impacts or changes in the temperatures. So we use these in combination with our empirical estimates to derive, let's say, careful projections of how the level of violence might change in the future under different scenarios. And we find very briefly that under the most optimistic scenario, we would expect about 90 million fewer women to be exposed to intimate partner violence by 2060 as compared to our most pessimistic scenario with more development challenges and more severe climate impacts. That would be about 10% difference in relative terms. To wrap up, we have found in our study that temperature anomalies indeed influence and have major impacts on intimate partner violence. But there is major differences, heterogeneities across different subgroups in the population, we saw stronger impacts on the younger and less educated women. Education generally is an interesting factor here. On one side, at the individual level, it increases resilience, but we also found, and I haven't shown that here, that generally improved education in societies reduces violence levels per se. So there's kind of like direct and indirect benefits that we generate through education. And finally, it's of course also important to look at prospective heterogeneity and different pathways that we can take in the future that can make a large difference when it comes to determining the violence levels that we might see in the future to come. Thank you very much.